And so Pastor Jeff, I'm going to give it over to you. Pastor Jeff and Ann are going to be moderating this discussion, so there you go.
Okay. Ann and I are going to co-moderate, and we've got 4 people that are coming to represent different areas of expertise and experience. It's going to be a real blessing. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start to your left and ask each of you to say your name and a little bit about you. Please feel free to give us some of your, I don't think qualifications is the right word, but kind of what you think you could contribute here tonight. And we're just really, really honored that you'd come. So Donnie?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Donnie Everett, and my beautiful wife here and I have been attending Calvary for about 4 years now. We're the father of 3 incredibly active boys, a 13-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 9-year-old. So you can only imagine how fun our household is, and loud particularly. I have the great pleasure in terms of my career professionally to serve the students of Monterey Seaside and Community. I'm the assistant superintendent of the Monterey Peninsula Unified School District. I began my career as a school counselor in Sacramento at an inner city high school. And before that, I worked as a juvenile hall counselor up in Butte County. So working with youth and children has been a huge passion of mine, and my wife's a teacher, and of ours, we share that collectively. And I just feel so blessed to be able to serve the students and families of our community here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Betsy Garcia, and I am from the YWCA here in Monterey County. I've been with the Y for about 2 years now, getting close to 2 years. And I've been in Monterey County for 10 years, so I'm originally from LA. And before working with human trafficking survivors, I was working with foster youth, which is where I was introduced to this topic, to CSEC and human trafficking. And that's where I really found the passion to support women and children in this field. And so that's why I'm here, and that's what we're trying to do together as a team.
Becca says I'm going to go. So my name's Janine, and I attend here at Calvary. I've been here about 7 years with my husband, Sam, and we, in the last year and a half, I've been volunteering at the YWCA with my co-teacher. Where is Chris Gibson? Right there, the brave and beautiful. She and I teach a class at the Y at the Safehouse with the women there. And it's just been an amazing ride, a wonderful blessing. And I can't wait to tell you more about it from that volunteer perspective.
My name is Becca Barone. I started going to Calvary in 2008 when I got saved, and then in 2015 I was called to go to the church plant in Salinas, and I've been losing my mind over there since. My day job, I am a social work supervisor for Child Protective Services. My unit does emergency response investigations, and I also supervise the the commercial sexual exploitation of children program for Monterey County. So all of our trafficked youth come through, and their cases are reviewed by me, and I supervise our whole response for the entire county, and sometimes across the state and the United States, and it's a lot of fun.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to just work our way through some questions, and some of these will be more appropriate for some of you on the panel, some will be for the rest of you, so I'll just go ahead and move into one. So what should I do if I see a potential trafficking situation? I think these are good questions for Betsy and Becca. Becca, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, like you said earlier, if you're out in the public and you see someone that you think is being trafficked, you should call the trafficking hotline. If you can't remember the crazy 1888 number, 911 is an appropriate alternative. If you see a child that you think is being trafficked, 911 or the The hotline for Monterey County for Child Protective Services are excellent options. 911 will get you to us. So again, calling the police is a great, just 3 numbers that we've all had memorized since we were like 2. But the county's number is 755-4661. Or if it's after hours, you call dispatch, which is 755-5100. But realistically, I will tell you, as somebody who has gone out in the field, it's better for you to just let the pros handle it. Like Ann said earlier, you can put yourself at great risk if you try to intervene, even if it is a child. And then you can also really destroy our ability to actually get that child into our care, also to catch the exploiters, and to also catch the people who are the Johns or who are trying to access the goods. So we really need you to just call the appropriate authorities.
Great. Betsy, anything else you want to add to that?
That was all great. I also want to add that here in Monterey County, we do have a domestic violence response team with the police department. So the police department will go to the scene if it's necessary then and there. And they will also call an advocate if it's necessary. I know that sometimes it might be a little overwhelming and maybe frustrating to think that the police officer might not know how to approach the situation when a woman or a child might not want to speak to the police officer. So because we have a response team, a female might come and speak to the young girl or the woman at hand, and become more approachable in the situation. And that is available here in Monterey County. Mm-hmm. So it's good to know that. And we also have cards. So we do have prayer cards, and there's we have a crisis line number embedded in that prayer card or a mail card. I actually forgot to bring them today, but I will share them, I promise, next time we come. And those cards can always be left somewhere. So often we might leave them at a bus stop. You might not give it directly to someone who is in the situation, but you might be able to leave it somewhere, and that woman, that child can pick it up and hopefully read that phone number and call it when they need that support.
Would you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yes. So I didn't mention earlier that I am a manager for a human trafficking Safehouse here in Monterey County. So the YWCA does have 2 safe houses. One is for domestic violence survivors, and that houses women and families, so it does house children as well. And we do have a safe house for human trafficking survivors, all adult women, and we do manage that. And within that, we provide wraparound services. So not only are we providing shelter for a whole year, we're also providing case management, we're providing transportation to anything and everything that they might need, doctor visits, going to church, going to classes, going to school, work. Within that, we're also providing classes that teaches them how to love themselves again, how to create boundaries, how to identify safe and unsafe people. And we have amazing volunteers that are teaching those courses that are also churchgoers. So, they introduce them to Calvary Church and introduce them to other mentors that they can connect with at church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. Am I running the show? Okay. All right. I want to talk a little bit about just, I think, what we talked about earlier, what with the brainwashing and the coercion, and why do some victims or survivors return to their traffickers or to their situation? Why do people go back to that? I think Janine might be able to answer that in her experience working with survivors for the past year.
Sure. Yeah. Obviously, when we speak in generalities, I just want to, give this caveat. It doesn't necessarily apply to every single woman, but these are things that we see consistently. And so I speak to this based off not only experience with survivors, but just as I've read different testimonies of survivors, or you've even seen them yourselves with the videos tonight. It's really about this manipulation and relationship that's developed between this victim and the trafficker. So however they got into this relationship, eventually they're so far deep into it that it just becomes all that they can see and all that they can know. I've read, even today I was reading The Diary of a Survivor and The Diary of Jasmine Grace. I recommend it. And even her own inner dialogue, she writes in her diary in those moments when she was in this trafficking situation. And then the beauty of this book, actually, she's now a believer and writes after the fact what Christ has done in her heart to be able to see her own identity separate from her trafficker now, which is amazing.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I think a lot of this, we encouraged a lot of parents to come to this, a lot of high school students, college students. So we really want to get into how this is impacting youth, how kids are being targeted. So I would love to have Becca, our CSEC pro, let us know a little bit about what's going on in our county, what trends you're seeing, how are kids being targeted.
Well, the makeup of a child that's being targeted is basically all kids are being targeted. We have referrals for children being commercially exploited as young as the age of 5 months old, as of this week, and up to 17, almost 18 years old. Children are Caucasian, they're Mexican American, they're African American, they're from other countries, they're from your backyard. In that trafficking bus that we saw in the news, of the 8 children that we were able to liberate, I think 4 of them were from out of county, 4 of them from within the county, and then from that one bust we found quite a few more kids. Kids are being trafficked that have inherent vulnerabilities, so problems at home. Our national statistic for a child that runs away, the likelihood that they'll be picked up by an exploiter is 48 hours, I believe, but the new research that's going to be coming out towards the end of this year is looking like it might be even quicker now, and that's because of social media. So like that traditional style of trafficking that we saw where there's an exploiter or a pimp and he has a house full of kids, that exists, but it is becoming less common. In Monterey County, we have the luxury of having tons of high-end sporting events. And what happens in our county is the week or 2 weeks prior to that sporting event, we get a spike in calls of kids that we have flagged as CSEC that have run away from home. And then following the event, we get the call from their parent that they have returned home. So what we're seeing is a new way that kids are being trafficked is their exploiter is letting them stay at home. So it's the most covert way to exploit them. And when they need them, they pull them. The kids run away. They're seen as being delinquent and a challenge, and then they go home. But then everything else that we see about them is exactly the same. They have a cell phone from somebody. We don't know where it came from. They suddenly have new fashion. They have a Coach bag. It's not a knockoff. They dress better than I do. We have no way of knowing how that 12-year-old girl got those UGG boots, things like that. And then they exploit them using social media. So they tell them that they're going to use pictures that they took of them doing fun things at the party that weekend, and they'll show it to all their friends at high school. We heard recently that one exploiter took a video of himself having sex with the victim's mom, and if she didn't do what he wanted, he was going to put that on the internet, and it would be her fault that her mom's life would be ruined. So it's really hard to pin down exactly how kids are being exploited because it changes very, very frequently, and the internet and social media has made it so that kids are very easily accessible. They're very impressionable. The prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed, so they're not able to make sound decisions or know the difference between danger and safety. And when other people's lives are in danger, they really get scared. And if they're from a home where their parents maybe aren't paying attention as much or don't maybe know how to parent as effectively, it is very challenging for those kids to have any sort of direction. So it's very prevalent, and it's very hard to pin down.
Donnie, I've got 2 questions for you. Have you, in your role with working with students for so many years, have you run into the trafficking issue? And what can we, secondly, do as parents to protect our kids, whether it's online or in life?
Yeah, so I mentioned that I was a counselor earlier in my career, and as a counselor, I did support and work alongside the families of students in our school who were victims of human trafficking. And the experiences, each one of them tore the families apart. The students that I worked with who were victims, oftentimes just from the school level, were students who were doing well, kind of flying under the radar, no red flags or anything like that. And then out of nowhere, this happens and we find out, and it was really, really hard to not only reach out and provide the support at the school level. Oftentimes the needs were beyond what the school level could provide, and so really helping the family access the resources in the community, and that was provided through various organizations as well, but it was detrimental to the family, and so a lot of what was shared was exactly much of how they became victims in that way. As a parent, I'll preface by saying that in no way am I an expert parent on this topic. In fact, I'm not an expert on any topic as parenting. I'm literally taking it day by day myself. But I definitely, in reflecting on this and thinking about my own experiences supporting students who are victims, there's kind of 3 things that come to my mind. And the first one is talking about this and just being able to talk about it with your children. Of course, at an age-appropriate level. And an important part of that, I know for me, becoming nervous or not knowing how to approach this or what to say, is I have to educate myself. I have to get to an understanding myself and be able to engage in a conversation with my children. But engaging in that conversation is incredibly important, and being able to talk about it. I think about it this way, that if I don't talk to them, somebody else will, and I don't know if that's going to be the right information given. So that would be number 1 for me. The second thing that I think about as incredibly important, particularly with this topic, is being able to set parameters and boundaries around technology. We live and we have to accept that our children and this generation, technology is a part of their life, and it will be a part of their life. And as parents, engaging with them and being able to help set parameters and boundaries will, in essence, for their future, help them be able to navigate technology. There's at your table, and what my family did was there's a media agreement as just an example of a way that we actually use this one with our boys who have laptops from school, and be able just to have a conversation around what those parameters are, but more importantly, why this is important, and being responsible with it. And the impact, as it was said, about social media being a major factor in this, as parents, being able to be able to help our children and set those parameters. And then finally, the third thing is asking questions. I know that there were the signs to pay attention to, and as parents, we need, if we're seeing something that's different, or if there's a change in just an immediate change or something just not right, that we ask questions, that we continue to ask questions even if they say nothing is wrong, and we still feel that way to keep pushing into our children. And so those are just a few things that.
That's great. I'd love to really add really quick. The video of the survivors, Rachel, who was the one who said she was trafficked when she was in college, and she said she didn't feel like a person anymore. She was a trainer for this training that the Y put on a couple weeks ago that I attended. That was super wonderful. And she was talking about how, just like Donnie was saying, that if you aren't willing to have those conversations, those kids are going to find those answers somewhere else. And for her, raised in her conservative, wonderful, loving home, the parents wouldn't talk about sex, or they wouldn't talk about danger with her. So she kind of went in blind, and it made her a little bit more vulnerable in college to being trafficked. And just as an aside, there have been times and I was going to talk about this earlier, when I've been on Facebook or Instagram and someone has direct messaged me who I have no idea who they are. And they've said something like, wow, you're really pretty. Have you ever thought about modeling? It's like, wow, that's a really nice compliment. But, and there were times, like 5 or 10 years ago that this happened that I had no idea what trafficking was, but because my parents raised me to be aware of stranger danger, I was like, well, that's weird. And I would just delete and block them. But just imagine if I hadn't been raised in a loving home, or I wanted to make quick cash, or I was just looking for an exciting new adventure, how would my response be different? So having these conversations with your kids is really important in an age-appropriate way, because I wasn't looking for it, but it came knocking on my door. So something that we really need to be aware of.
I wonder, Betsy, or any of you, if you, without, of course, giving a name, have a success story or something that you can at least tell us about a person who's come under perhaps your influence and is doing well today. Can you think of such a thing? Or any story you'd like to tell?
I love telling these stories. Probably one of my favorites is, so we had just finished a semester-long class about safe people. And one of the girls, we gave them an opportunity. We took a moment to celebrate during our last class, and we took a moment to just speak words of encouragement into their lives, and then also to give them an opportunity to share what they had gotten out of the class, or just anything that they wanted to share. And one of the girls said, well, we didn't think you two white church ladies knew what you were doing when you got here.
Nice.
But we have certainly come to love you and really appreciate what you've done in our lives. And I couldn't believe she called us that, but I was so absolutely, that's exactly what I wanted to hear, because that's exactly how we felt, right? Sitting in those seats on those first days of class, but then to see over the 12 weeks, 13, however many, to build this relationship and to see the change in the dynamic in the classroom and how they, interacted with each of us, with Chris and I, how they interacted with each other, and then when they were able at the end to celebrate, what, and to recognize what they had accomplished as individuals and as a little class. It was really rewarding and really fun to be a part of.
Anyone else?
Well, I think for child welfare, we measure success a little differently, because when you're liberating a child at the age of 13, we're likely going to be working with that child for 5 years, and that 5 years is going to be a series of really low, and then kind of little burps up and down. We don't really get to the peaks very often. But we recently had a case that was a child that we knew was CSEC, was trafficked, and was also recruiting. We had really spent a lot of man hours trying to get her back. And we got a call. We had 3 very emotional officers who worked with me to come up with a plan at 1 a.m. that I would go in and interview her until the CSEC advocate could arrive at 3 a.m. And we got her to stay where she was for 2 hours, and then the advocate got her to stay where she was until she fell asleep. Slept in her shoes, fully expecting to run away once she got enough energy, but I promised her breakfast, so when I went to take her breakfast the next day, she was still at our receiving center. And we put a lot of effort into her emergency care and had our emergent multidisciplinary team meeting the next work day, it was a long weekend. It was a holiday weekend, so we were watching her for about 4 days, almost 5. And by the grace of God, she is still in placement. She is doing about as well as she can be, but she has been in one place for over a month now, And that honestly was our like Christmas in July miracle, because it just, if you knew like the full details, I mean, none of us, we didn't even believe it was gonna happen. And so it was, stuff like that for us is success. Seeing a child stabilize in that way, be somewhere safe, even like, you know, all of the things she is dealing with now that she is sober and she is able to understand what's been happening with her, you know, that it's not fun. You know, those things are not great for her, but it is a miracle for her to be able to be in a place where she's safe to process those. And so that is an ongoing active success. So.
Beautiful.
So success stories are different for us as well. Our safe house can be full, you know, in 1 week, and then it could be empty the next month. So it's changing all the time, and we're okay with that, you know, as long as they come into our home and they find a safe bed to sleep in. And a success story for me is that they call again and that they return to our safe house because they know somewhere they can go, and they've identified that they are willing to change, you know, they are ready to change, and if they leave again and come back again, that's okay, you know, and we accept them with open arms again, and we repeat ourselves over and over again that they are fully capable of being the person that they want to be. And so, you know, we give them resources, and when we hear a call from them, or we hear that this person texted, you know, an advocate or staff member, that is truly a success story for us. And we can't say that out of, you know, all of the residents that have come to our safe house that they've graduated, but from the stories, success stories of the residents that have, it's great to see that they're working out in the community. It's great to see that, you know, they now have a child and things like that. So, you know, there is stories like that, and it takes patience and a team for that to happen.
Be quick, and it does really take a team, and I think that's really important. So when I was a counselor, there was a 9th grade student. She was 14 years old at the time, and due to some sexual abuse in the home, she was removed from her home and placed in the receiving home, and kind of was going through the system, through the foster care system. And during that time, she ran away at that time and then was trafficked. I remember that kind of leading up to that, you know, it was already really difficult, and just kind of supporting her when she was at school was really hard, and then her being absent for a long period of time, and I honestly thought I didn't know if I was going to see her again. It just was a long period of time, and then ended up about 4 weeks later, I was kind of hearing that, you know, she was found, and then she was back, and then probably about a month or two after that, she ended up back at school. That whole 9th grade year was really, really tough, but she ended up becoming reunited back with her mom. And it was at that time that I think that reunification and then the support process of kind of just building the healing that needed to take place. And it took a lot of time, but she ended up graduating high school, going on to community college. It's the last I've heard. I moved at the time, but I just thinking about that as a success with her.
All right, do we have any texting questions that we can answer before we wrap up? Okay. I know we are not supposed to intervene, but is there any questions to ask someone who we think could be a potential trafficking victim? That's a great question. Becca, Betsy?
I think a safe question is, do you need help? That you can sometimes get the no, but see the yes. You can, I mean, we do have resources. I'm kind of kicking myself as well, because we have these really cool chapsticks that they look like chapstick, but when you roll out the label, they're like questions about, you know, our allergy information. That questions number is actually the trafficking hotline. So I can get those to Ann, and she can have them available for you guys here. But asking if they need help, letting them know. I'll say, I did say don't do anything, but, as who I am, I have been out in the public and seen something that I didn't care for, and I have said, you need help. If you need help, I'm gonna walk away and I'll look back at you. You can throw me a peace sign. And they did. And so I called for help. So there's ways you can do that where you can be discreet. I'm not gonna say like, I do my job. I have seen a parent, probably rightfully scold their child who's being a pill at Target, and then found myself following them for an hour, which is more secondary trauma, and when I know I need to take some vacation time. But it's like, I'm not saying, you should like completely remove yourself, but it is safest for you to stay away. But just saying like, do you need help is a good way to kind of neutrally get yourself out of that. And then, if the person that you're concerned about overreacts, that's also a good indicator of what's actually going on. And then, I've also covertly taken a picture of the person I was concerned about with my phone, both the victim and who I thought was an exploiter. So if, law enforcement did show up, I'd have something to show them what to look for. So, but, we give you the advice, but you're an autonomous adult. Do what you do.
Thanks, Becca. Betsy, do you have anything to add to that?
So I would recommend the same thing. So, asking if they're okay, and kind of asking them, like, are you okay? Like physically you can ask them. And you can also ask in a non-weird way if they have a safe place to go home to, if they're going somewhere safe. So, and that might seem a little awkward at first, and it depends on what type of situation you are and what setting you are, and how you're asking that. So I think it just depends where you are, what type of relationship you have with the person. If this is the first time you're seeing them, you might not just go up to them and ask them all these questions. But if you're seeing them after a couple of times, if you're seeing them at school, if you're seeing them, you constantly see them in the same block for a couple of times, you might be able to start asking, oh, I've seen you around, do you live around here, or do you work around here? You're starting to kind of ask, to find out whether or not you're finding out whether or not there's red flags. Mm-hmm. So you want to start getting to know them as opposed to asking right away those questions. So it's more of a getting to know than asking whether or not they're safe.
Yeah, and I think it's also like when you're thinking about doing something, it's kind of like when you get CPR certified, a good way to test if somebody was paying attention is to ask them what the first step is, and they'll be like, oh, well, it's, compressions, and you're like, actually, it's not. It's check the environment to make sure it's safe for you to enter. And it's the same thing for this. If you feel as though you're being, compelled or called to approach, make sure it is safe for you to do so. We can give you only so much advice, but at the end of the day, if there's anything you're going to hold on to, don't get yourself killed trying to save somebody, because that's going to be counterproductive. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, that's great. And then do we have another question? As a high school teacher, how can I appropriately educate my students on the risks of trafficking? Donnie?
I think now technology is a major part of education, and I think utilizing technology has so many benefits, and this is, part of, I think, education is teaching. I think a part of that, or an important piece of that, is as an educator, as a teacher, is being able to help, again, teach and address these topics in the classroom that's appropriate, talking about the importance of responsibility when it comes to technology, talking about, building those relationships. I would say that we can talk a lot about teaching, but ultimately when it comes down to it, the relationships that a teacher or that any of us have with a young person goes far beyond that. And being able to go back to what was said about engaging in conversations and being able to have a relationship enough where you can begin to ask questions, or at least offer the right environment that a young person may feel comfortable sharing things that they might want to talk about that they don't know how to talk about. So I think ultimately, as teachers, it's important to a lot of things we can teach on and reinforce in the classroom, but I think more importantly is the relationship that is built with students and creating an environment in the classroom where topics or things that can come up and surface to be able to address as a community, but also more importantly, even on that one-on-one. And then knowing that you don't have to know all the answers and you don't have to be the one to provide the therapeutic intervention in that moment, but to be able to provide the help and walk that student through getting the help they need.
I do want to add to that. In addition to that, you can also reach out to your local agencies, like the YWCA, the Rape Crisis Center, and they can come out and do presentations to your students. So we do go to high schools and we do presentations not to only teachers, but to also the students in the health classes. And that's free of charge for both of the agencies. They provide that.
You just reminded me, yes, and so actually California has just enabled a law that requires through the health curriculum that human trafficking is a component of that's educated at the school site, as well as providing information to parents, as well as providing professional development to staff on site. So this is fairly new for California state law, but that it's very specific to human trafficking.
Yeah, and those are really effective if you do have MCRCC or the YW come out to your school. I know when a presentation has been given because I get 2 calls about a child that made a disclosure to the presenter or to their school site counselor afterwards. So as awkward as it may be, or you may feel as though you don't have the right words, when you talk about the issue, most kids are gonna, it's gonna spike something for them, and they're gonna make a call for help, because I will tell you, the environment where children feel the safest outside of their homes and sometimes above their homes is at school with their teacher that they really like, that's super cool, that makes them feel really smart and helps them learn well. So they will disclose to you, and then we can start our intervention.
So we definitely want to spend the last 15 to 20 minutes with your table leaders, asking some clarifying questions and praying together. But I do want to end, and if you can do this in 30 seconds or less, what gives you hope of things getting better?
I only have 30 seconds. All right. Well, then I'll give you some homework. So read Isaiah 58, because this is part of what God has used in my life. There's a stirring, I think, that he does in an individual and in a church, and I think he's doing it now. And in Isaiah 58, he says to love one another. This is what I've called you to do, to go into the darkness and be the light. And I think that because God is who he is and sees what he sees and does what he does, therefore we can do these things that he's called us to. And so I also have hope because I've had the faith to step into it and to see it for myself, right? And to see the success stories and to partner with others and link arm in arm with that.
I think that, yes, as Janine said, in my job from day one, I have seen that the Lord desires to bring a light to these dark places. It's the glory of kings to conceal a matter, but it's the glory of God to bring it up and to search it out. And so I started working with CSEC in 2014 when we were developing our protocol for Monterey County, and I was the only social worker at the beginning, and then we started to build it. And it's not really been a snowball effect. It was kind of like a pebble was kicked at a mountain and an avalanche fell. Because every time we get a call, you really, you have an idea of what's happening with these kids, but you don't really know until you work with a child directly. And I've seen that knowledge is growing. We're seeing the program being implemented better and more effectively. We're getting more community partners. We're having, churches partner with us. So obviously, if it's growing, it's blessed, and the Lord sees it as good. So there's absolutely hope. It's a very challenging field to work within, and it feels hopeless at times, but it is getting better. And we are a team and unified in fighting against it, and it hopefully will one day be eradicated, but centuries down the road, probably.
So I've met some amazing survivors while working here at the YWCA the past 2 years, and I think that every time I meet a new victim who becomes a survivor, right? So within the process, they identify I'm no longer a victim, I am now a survivor, and just within that process, I think that I always learn or I always gain more hope, and I know that it's possible.
This gives me hope. The fact that our church family can come together and spend an evening on a topic as important as this, that oftentimes can be misplaced or kind of put off to the side. This is incredibly important, and I'm so thankful that we are all that all of you are here tonight, and that it takes a community, it takes us all to really be aware of this and to do our part, and whatever our part we can. But it is important. That part is really important, and so I'm inspired by all of you that are here tonight.
So now we're going to gather and pray. We need God's help. We need God's blessing to fall upon our community. We love this area, and we're going to spend some time now praying that God would strengthen these ones that are here working and use all of us in the battle. So let's pray.
And if your table leader's a panelist,